Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. Welcome to the Department of Toxic Substances Control's public meeting on rulemaking concepts for assessing administrative penalties for hazardous waste violators. Today is August 2nd, 2023. I'd like to welcome you to the Byron Scher Auditorium. It's been a little while since I've been here in person myself, and I'm actually very pleased to be here and looking forward to the meeting that we have prepared for us all today. In addition to kicking off a 3-meeting series for this effort, today also begins the public comment period for this effort. It runs from today, August 2nd, through September 29th, 2023. My name is Marcus Simpson. I'll be your facilitator today. I work in the department's Office of Environmental Equity in the Public Participation Branch. Very pleased to be here. And like to extend my gracious appreciation and welcome to you all for being here in person from wherever you have come. We hope that you had a pleasant and smooth commute or drive here. Thank you for being here. One more time, today kicks off the public comment period for this initiative, and it does run through September 29th. There are a multitude of ways for the public to provide feedback. Doing so today here in person is one of those ways. As you came into the room, you saw at the sign-in table, we also have comment cards, a very unmistakable bright green color. And in addition, we have a website dedicated to this initiative through DTSC's web portal. So we have devised numerous ways for folks to participate and to provide your feedback. And we definitely hope that helps us with our goal. And our goal today is to hold an informative and inclusive dialogue and to hopefully receive feedback from a wide, diverse array of stakeholders. Just an invitation to come on down, folks. There are plenty of seats here in the front. Please do not be shy. I want to see you and hear you that much clearer. So no pressure, but if you'd like to, come on down. One really quick disclaimer and notification about today's meeting. There are stakeholders who could not be here in person, so we are recording today's meeting. And once prepared, the recording of today's meeting will be placed online, and so people can re-review the meeting, or folks that could not be here today will have the opportunity to review the meeting, and it will be kept online through the duration of the public comment period through September 29th. That is a date that you will hear a couple of times today, and you will also see it presented in our presentation materials. Just a quick statement that this is an initial and preliminary rulemaking effort. We have not quite entered the formal rulemaking process for this initiative. As such, the department is not planning to provide written responses to the feedback given today or throughout the public comment period. However, I want to reassure you that your input and your feedback is critical, and it's important to shaping the decisions that are associated with this effort. So, a real bit of quick housekeeping. While we don't expect any emergency situations to arise today, if any should, please look around you. Take note of where your exits are. Our primary exits are in the rear of the room that you came through. If it's safe to exit that way, and we should need to exit the room quickly, please safely and orderly head for the exits, turn to your right, and go down the staircase and then exit the building through the lobby. And should you need, we even have a designated meeting spot across the street at Cesar Chavez Park near the statue. I believe they have a farmer's market going on today as well. So please feel free at any point, should you need to take a break and use the restroom or get a drink of water or just stretch your legs. You would exit the room, make a quick left, you go down to the end of the hall, and the restrooms and fountains are located to your left. Okay? And Just a quick and courteous request, if you have not signed the sign-in sheet, please do. We'd like to know who's with us today. We'd also like to know if there are constituents or organizations that you represent. And that's where our sign-in sheets and our handout materials are. The materials are designed to help facilitate a fuller understanding of the presentation and this initiative. We have printouts of the presentations. We have printouts of our agendas. We have a glossary of terms to help promote understanding of the terms that are going to come up. And we have a summarized sheet that conceptualizes this effort. So those handouts are available in Spanish as well as English. And for those that prefer or need to hear today's presentation in Spanish, we also have simultaneous interpretation. There are headsets and receivers available at the sign-in table. Please feel free to grab one. Mr. James Gambrell, who is at the sign-in table, will help get you oriented and set up to be on the proper channel. I'd like to take a moment to introduce today's team and panel who've worked so diligently and so hard to prepare this presentation and the meeting. Again, my name is Marcus Simpson. I work in DTSC's Office of Environmental Equity in the Public Participation Branch. Oh.
Marcus, just a quick question. Everybody in here looks pretty healthy, but where's the closest AED?
That's a great question. Let me find that out, and I'll get back to you in a few minutes after I do my spiel. Okay. All right. Thank you. Appreciate the consideration and the thought. So, James Gambrell is a public participation specialist with the department. He's at the sign-in table and will be in the room shortly. I would also like to introduce Mr. Christopher Johnson, supporter and assister today. He is an environmental scientist with the department. And allow me to introduce our panel. I'd like to start with Ms. Renee Shaperka, Senior Environmental Scientist with the Hazardous Waste Management Program. Ms. Cheyenne Lewis, Environmental Scientist with the Hazardous Waste Management Program. Ms. Abdelina Sinas, Supervising Senior Environmental Scientist with the Hazardous Waste Management Program. And last but not least, I introduce Julianne Colbert, our attorney in the Office of Legal Counsel with the department. Thank you for being here, and thank you for the work that you dedicated for this. So, with our introductions handled, I'd like to invite Ms. Renee Shaperka to the podium and the microphone, and she's going to lead us in a tribal land acknowledgement. Renee?
To the original people of this land, the Nisenan people, the Southern Maidu, Valley and Plains Miwok, and the Patwin Wintun peoples, may we acknowledge and honor the native people who came before us and who are the first stewards who respect the land we walk on, the water we drink, the animals who live among us, and the trees that protect us. May we continue to do this work of honor and in partnership with the native people who we walk beside on these ancestral lands that we've gathered here today. The department will continue to acknowledge, appreciate, and show gratitude for the Indigenous people's history, contribution, culture, and lives. Thank you.
Thank you, Renee, for the wonderful acknowledgement. Okay. Before we get underway with part one of our presentation, I just wanted to kind of review today's agenda and the processes so that we all have an understanding of the program. We have a two-part presentation today, and after each part, we have allowed time for a public feedback segment. We'll have two of those today dedicated to gathering feedback and input from the audience. Following the first public feedback segment, we're going to have a quick 10-minute break. Just a quick word, your printed agendas and your presentations have that break listed as happening after part 2 of the presentation. That is not how it is. It will be happening after our first public feedback segment, after part 1. I just wanted to let you know. In addition, the presentation slides, there were a few late additions, and so you have not lost your mind. If your slide numbers seem off a little bit, please just go forward in the presentation. All the slides are there, but there were just a couple of late additions that I wanted to make you aware of. So, when we return from our 10-minute break, we will reconvene for part 2 of the presentation, and then we will have a second public feedback segment for individuals that would like to provide any more input and feedback. Okay, so now that we've got the logistics and the housekeeping and the gracious welcome out of the way, I'd like to invite our first presenter for part 1 of our presentation, Ms. Cheyenne Lewis.
The objective of this project is to strengthen enforcement against serious violators in overburdened communities and incorporate environmental justice considerations in the penalty approach. In 2019 and 2020, we met with the public on this topic and asked for ideas on how to improve administrative penalty regulations. The results from those workshops revealed the need for clear language, increased transparency in the penalty approach, a streamlined penalty table known as the matrix, mandatory minimum penalties, stronger enforcement against serious violators, and considerations for small business owners. The concepts will increase penalties, promote accessible language, and foster partnerships with communities and industry. These main themes are the basis for developing the concepts we will be presenting today. Now we will explore how the concepts proposed will impact the base penalty dollar amount or the starting penalty before any other adjustments are made. On the slide is a diagram that demonstrates 2 potential methods of determining a penalty for hazardous waste violations. This approach is used for Class 1 and sometimes Class 2 violations if accompanied with a Class 1. The new concept, or Method 1, is a set penalty. Set penalties will have established penalty amounts for specific violations. The second method is the penalty table, and it considers potential for harm, extent of deviation, and adjustments that result in various penalty amounts. On the next slide, we will discuss this concept in greater detail. The first concept we will discuss is set penalties. Set penalties do not require the inspector to go through the traditional penalty assessment method of using the penalty table. Please note that set penalties will not be affected by any adjustments. Set penalties would be a new addition in the regulation. This addition is in response to public desire for mandatory minimums for violations and transparent dollar amounts. Set penalties apply to common violations committed by universal waste handlers, hazardous waste transporters, and generators. The regulations will retain discretion to choose to apply set penalties or to calculate using the traditional penalty assessment based on the violation circumstances. Set penalties will only be applied to violations that did not cause harm or release. Additionally, the regulations will have a set penalty for facilities that fail to respond in writing when legally required to do so. On this slide is an example of a set penalty for a training violation. The regulations require all personnel to be trained on universal waste handled at the facility. If any of the requirements are not met, then a defined penalty will be issued for this specific violation. The concept aims to identify Class 1 or Class 2 violations that did not cause harm, are easy to correct, and easy to investigate. The concept provides a legal description from California Code of Regulations, Title 22, Section 66273.36 A through D, instructions on how to apply the penalty and the penalty amount. At the end of the presentation, we would like to hear from you what other types of common violations should be eligible for a set penalty. The last set penalty concept would apply to specific letters that are defined in law or regulations. For example, Facilities that fail to submit certain documents on time or submit incomplete or insufficient information would be subject to a set penalty. This would be applied to notice of deficiency letters, request for information letters, and corrective action letters. To recap, set penalties are defined penalties for common violations that do not cause harm, are easy to correct, and easy to investigate. In the next slide, Renee will discuss the changes to the second method, the penalty table, which is a customized penalty based on the circumstances of hazardous waste violations.
All right, thank you, Cheyenne. As she mentioned, the penalty table is used for hazardous waste violations that are more serious and complex, and so it provides a range of dollar amounts to match the violation circumstances. So this is the current table. It's referred to as a matrix in the regulations. And the penalty table provides multiple options of dollar amounts that ranges from the statutory maximum of $70,000 to zero. The dollar amounts are grouped into threes called a range. A range is found by ranking the violation's potential for harm and extent of deviation. The rule to find a range is to see where these two rankings intersect on the table. So if the violation's potential for harm is minimal and extent of deviation is moderate, then where those two cross on the table is the range an inspector has to use to select a penalty. The current regulations are unclear which of the $3 amounts to choose from. The table also values the potential for harm equally with the extent of deviation. And so this results in copied ranges seen here. So we have these first two that are duplicated, these next three in the middle are also duplicated, and then these final two. And that limits the penalty options to the violation circumstances. The penalty table also allows for a $0 penalty amount seen here. So in the update, the new table has a larger dollar amount range for serious hazardous waste violations, and it gets rid of the copied ranges by emphasizing the violation's potential for harm over the extent of deviation, and this is in alignment with the US EPA's penalty table. Each range was also expanded from 3 options to 5, and this is again to allow for more options to select a penalty that fits the violation circumstances. Notice now that the $0 penalty amount was replaced with $700. This is in response to stakeholder feedback requesting stronger enforcement. So we ensured all Class 1s and some Class 2 violations will receive a monetary penalty. Okay, now let's take a look at how the inspector chooses an appropriate dollar amount by better defining the violation's potential for harm and introducing a new concept, a penalty selector. So currently the regulations consider the characteristic of the waste or how harmful it is, the quantity of the waste, the harm to humans, animals, the environment, and potable drinking water. In the update, we're going to add the following factors to expand the definition. We're going to add evidence of release, waste mismanagement, extent and persistence of the waste, and preventative provisions taken. Okay, so once the inspector determines the range, they must select between one of those 5 options provided. In the update, we're going to define how this is done. So the penalty selector ensures transparent and consistent penalty selection. So each range has 5 options, and the rule is going to be to start always at the very bottom and move upward for each of the criteria met. The criteria is going to be if the waste was a RCRA-defined hazardous waste, if the violation occurred 3 or more times, if multiple violations are grouped for a single penalty, if a release occurred, and the size and sophistication of the facility. So if none of the criteria is met for the violation, then the penalty would be the bottom. And if 4 or more are met, then the top penalty would be selected. Okay, so I'm going to put this all together now with the 3 concepts: the updated penalty table, updated potential for harm, and our updated penalty selector. So the inspector determines the violation has moderate harm, and this is based on the characteristic, the amount, harms to human, environment, animals, and potable drinking water, any evidence of the release, waste mismanagement, extent and persistence of the waste, and if the violator took any preventative measures. The extent of deviation is moderate. So where those 2 cross on the table would be the range or the 5 options to select a penalty. Now, using the penalty selector criteria, which is if it was RCRA defined hazardous waste, if the violation occurred 3 or more times, if multiple violations are grouped for a single penalty, if there is a release that occurred, and the size and sophistication of the facility. In this example, we're going to start at the very bottom, and we're going to say that a RCRA-defined hazardous waste was involved, so we would go up 1 level. And we're going to say the violation occurred 3 or more times, so it would go up an additional level. No other criteria is met, and so this is the level that we would select the penalty. Okay, Cheyenne will now present concepts that will adjust the base penalty amount either to increase or decrease that. And the base penalty amount, again, is the penalty that we just selected from the table.
So what are factors that may impact the base dollar amount? These factors are considerations the department takes when assessing the penalty. These considerations, called adjustments, account for circumstances that may call for increasing or decreasing the dollar amount or base penalty selected when using the penalty table. This slide is an overview of the new adjustments to the base penalty. The arrows indicate the effect the adjustment has on the penalty. A down arrow indicates lowering the penalty, and an up arrow indicates raising the penalty. The proposed conceptual adjustments, self-disclosure, environmental equity, and unique factors will be discussed in the next slides. Our first new adjustment, self-disclosure, builds on current regulatory language. Our regulations contain a provision addressing situations where the violation occurred despite good faith and efforts to comply with the regulation. In the update, we expand this language to define the adjustment. This update will allow a downward adjustment to facilities that voluntarily notify the department that they committed a violation. The violation resulted in no actual harm to humans, animals, or the environment, and the violation reported has not occurred previously within the last 3 years. We developed these criteria using the California Air Resource Board's enforcement policy. This concludes the self-disclosure adjustment. The next adjustment will address DTSC's environmental justice goals. Enforcement seeks to recognize the disparities and burdens within and across communities with the new environmental equity adjustment. Through this approach, the department aims to foster effective enforcement practices by incorporating equity as a guiding principle. The department strives to ensure that its enforcement efforts are not only equitable, but responsive to the needs and concerns of impacted communities. The adjustment will increase the penalty for serious hazardous waste violators located in impacted communities, identified by using the Office of Environmental Health Hazards Assessment CalEnviroscreen tool. To prevent harm and to protect the vulnerable, the concept explores a way to return a portion of the penalty collected as a result from this adjustment to impacted communities by one of 2 mechanisms. The first mechanism diverts funds to supplemental environmental projects, SEPs, which are environmentally beneficial projects submitted by private entities the facility agrees to voluntarily fund. This mechanism would require a statutory change to implement the regulatory change. The second mechanism is diverting funds to the Toxic Substances Control Account, TSCA, which funds DTSC's cleanup sites throughout the state of California. Which mechanism would you prefer to see penalties collected by this adjustment used for? On the next slide, we will look at this concept in greater detail. Here is the environmental equity adjustment. It is applied to facilities located in an area with a Cal EnviroScreen score of 50 to 100. The penalty will be increased by 5 to 20% based on the waste handled and management activities occurring at the facility. This approach aims to ensure funds recovered in this adjustment will be sent to either the TSCA account to fund cleanup sites or SEPs to fund community proposals. This reinvestment creates a mechanism in which funds are utilized for communities by supporting initiatives that directly address their specific needs and priorities. In doing so, the department strives to build trust, collaboration, long-term partnerships with impacted communities. However, we understand that some violations are out of the control of the violator. In the next slide, we will discuss a concept that will lower the penalty based on violation circumstances. The final new adjustment is unique factors, and it will clarify current regulatory language. The current regulation circumstances would allow for a downward adjustment. The regulations currently state the violation was completely beyond the control of the violator. In the update, we will better define this language and incorporate specific situations or circumstances, such as a workers' strike, incinerator backlogs, natural disasters, and other economic and supply chain issues that may arise. Here is a summary of the adjustments discussed in Part 1. Self-disclosure incentivizes self-reporting a violation. Environmental equity recovers dollars for impacted communities. And unique factors provides the department a mechanism to account for unforeseen external events that may lead to a violation. This concludes Part 1 of the presentation. I will now hand it over to Marcus to facilitate the public comment session.
Hello again. Thank you, Renee and Cheyenne, for that phenomenal information. Certainly have given us a lot to consider. And before we get underway with the public feedback segment, Mr. Asti, at the outset of the meeting, asked a question about our nearest defibrillator, AED device. It's on this floor, Mr. Asti, and right outside the room, if you make a right, it's about 60 feet down, right near the stairway. Yep, thank you for that question. Really appreciate it. Okay. I wanted to start by maybe getting a show of hands just to find out how many folks may want to come to the microphone and provide feedback or input. And the reason for that is because I want to make sure that we've got ample time for everyone to be able to do so. And if I needed to consider a time limit on comments, a show of hands would help me determine if there's a time limit that needs to be considered, and if so, how much time. Do we have anyone who would like to come to the microphone and provide us with comments and feedback? Don't be shy. Okay. All right. Just a quick review. Providing verbal comments at the podium and the microphone is just one way that we are accepting feedback. Everyone should have a bright green public comment card. If you don't, we will make sure you get one if you would like one. And if you'd like to write your comments there and provide it to any team member, we will make sure that they are compiled and considered. And so, and in addition to the comment cards and verbally at the podium, again, we also have a website dedicated to this initiative. And on that website, we've got a segment for members of the community to provide comments. Yes, question? Do you have a microphone? We do have a microphone that we can bring to folks that either cannot come to the podium for whatever reason or just would prefer not to. Yeah, I encourage folks to come to the podium, but we are set up for that, absolutely. Got you. Absolutely, absolutely. We can do that. Would you like to make a comment?
I have not a specific comment.
Now's the time to do it. Can we do it into the microphone so we make sure that it gets recorded? Thank you. And if you could state your name and any organization that you represent, that would be helpful for us. Thank you.
So my name is Christine Flowers, and I'm a professor at Sac State, so quasi representing them. I teach environmental studies. I also work with NGOs, so both upstream and downstream. Currently Keep California Beautiful, which has put in some SEP projects into this list, but have a long history with dealing with hazardous waste, illegal dumping, all kinds of things, both as a state employee and NGO executive and at the college. So I think it's great. I think what you're trying to do is a really good start just as a general comment, and it's long overdue. So thank you, first of all, and then I'll make more comments, written comments, after seeing the whole presentation.
Okay.
But I'll speak up first because I hate it when the students are in the back of the classroom and won't say anything. So there you go.
Thank you so much. And thank you, Chris, for helping out with that. Appreciate your feedback and just your willingness and participation and being here today. Thank you. Going once, twice. Any other comments, folks, on part one?
I know you said you're not answering, or responding to public comment, but
Chris, could we help out with? We're recording the meeting, so I just want to make sure that your audio is fed into the recording. Name and organization, if you could, too, please.
It's Matt Williamson. I'm an attorney at the law firm of Manat, Phelps & Phillips. I have a question for the group. I don't know if you're comfortable answering it here or just you could take the question as a comment, but I think it was the potential for harm. Going through here. Yeah, potential for harm. We've added 4 additional factors to be considered. And I guess my question, because it's not clear from the materials I've seen so far, is are those just 4 additional factors, any one of which can drive potential for harm higher, or is this going to now become a more comprehensive analysis looking at all of the factors? And my concern would be is if you double the number of factors and any one factor can drive potential for harm high, you're going to be creating a system where any small violation could be characterized with you're doubling the opportunity for potential for harm to be increased, and we've seen the penalties are increasing substantially. So I'm wondering, to help direct a written public comment, which direction you think you're going with the rulemaking.
Thank you, Matt. Appreciate that question and the comment. Is there anyone on the panel who would like to take a stab at Abdelin? Thank you.
So, Matt, thank you very much for your comments, and we acknowledge your feedback. The intent of adding those added factors is to make it more clear for the regulator, those that are using the regulations to calculate the penalty, and to make it clear for them how they go, which category to use. The intent is not, more factors to drive the potential for harm higher. It's just to make it more clear to them where the potential for harm should go. Either it's minimal, moderate, or major.
Thank you, Abdelin, and thank you, sir, for the comment. So, by show of hands, are there any more comments or questions on part one of the presentation before we break? Okay. I'd like to say thank you to the folks that participated and were willing to ask questions and share. That helps out so much. Okay, I'm looking at the clock. It says 1:34, and I think it's time for a brief break. And let's time it out from 1:35 just to have a nice, relatively even 10-minute number. If we could come back and reconvene at 1:45 p.m., we would very much appreciate it. And then we will get started with part 2 of our presentation. And we will, again, have another public feedback segment before we adjourn today. Thank you. Okay, everyone, let's get started with part 2 of our presentation. And I hope everyone had an opportunity to stretch the legs, get a quick drink of water, and maybe even make a call or two. Just a quick reminder, if you have not had a chance to grab a comment card and you'd like, they are still on the table outside of the room. Please feel free to pick one up. And also, one more broken record reminder that the public comment period for this initiative begins today, and again, it runs through September 29th, 2023. So, I'd like to invite Ms. Renee Shapurka back to the microphone, and she's going to kick us off for part 2 of today's presentation. Renee?
Okay, so part 2 of the presentation are concepts that will update the current regulations. The concepts aim to keep the fundamentals of the original regulations with improvements to increase clarity and consistency of application. This slide is an overview of the current adjustments to the base penalty. Again, the arrows indicate the effect the adjustment has on the base penalty. An up arrow indicates raising it, and a down arrow indicates lowering the penalty. Most of these will largely remain the same, with the exception of the penalty lowering effect being removed from prophylactic effect, violators' cooperation, violators' intent, and compliance history. The multi-day and economic benefit will be updated, and I'll discuss those in the next few slides. So the first concept of part 2 is an update on how we calculate multi-day penalties. The basic principle of multi-day is to increase the penalty for violations that continue for more than 1 day. The concept will update the adjustment to increase the per day penalty from 2% to 5% of the base penalty, and that's the amount that's selected from the table. This 5% per day penalty will apply to all days in violation prior to its discovery. The concept will create a period of time where no additional per day penalties are added while the violator corrects the violation. During this period, referred to as the fix-it period, no per day penalties will be added. However, if the facility fails to correct the violation before the end of the fix-it period, then the per day penalty will increase to 20% per day until compliance is met. Lastly, the update will expand the application of multi-day penalties for non-continuous days in which timing violations have been grouped for a single penalty. Okay, so I'm going to walk you through a timeline example of this on the next slide. Okay, so I'm going to walk you through an example now. Currently, the multi-day is calculated at 2%, but again, this proposal is going to increase it to 5% and 20% depending on compliance. So day 1 is the day the violation starts. And for easy math, we're going to say the base penalty selected from the table was $1,000. So for all continuing days, a percentage of the $1,000 will be added on to the penalty. On day 21, an inspector conducts a site visit and discovers the violation. 20 days have passed, and so each day is assessed 5% of that base penalty, or $50 per day, adding an additional $1,000 to the penalty. The inspector issues a violation and establishes the fix-it period to correct the violation. In this example, the facility has 30 days to fix the violation. So from days 22 to 51, during this fix-it period time, there's no per day penalty added. Now, in this case, the facility doesn't return to compliance until day 61. So 10 days have passed after this fix-it period. The 10 days would be assessed at 20% of the base penalty, which is $200 per day for each of the 10 days, adding an additional $2,000 to the penalty. So the total penalty for this timing violation would be the $1,000 base penalty plus the $1,000 from the 20 days at 5%, plus an additional $2,000 for the 10 days at 20%, which would equal the $4,000 penalty. Okay, the next concept update is economic benefit. The adjustment increases the penalty by the costs, by the avoided costs or the increased profits enjoyed by the violator by operating their business out of compliance. So at the moment, economic benefit can widely be applied to recoup any amount, which may result in a high labor cost to the department to calculate. So to improve transparency, the concept will update or to include a rule which will to increase the penalty only if the economic benefit is more than $500. And so this rule promotes financial stewardship by the government to avoid wasting staff resources to calculate a potentially very small economic benefit. This does not mean that there will be no penalty if it's less than $500. It's just that the penalty will not be increased due to this adjustment. So lastly, the concept will also expand the definition to include industry knowledge, such as hourly wages, disposal fees, and use the federal computer benefit model. This is the last concept that will address an adjustment to the penalty. Our last and final concept is going to rewrite all the sections of the regulations. Okay, so this is our last concept, and it's to revise the regulations in a plain language rewrite. The concept addresses feedback to improve readability, use clear language, and to create transparency. Plain language is a written communication style that's legally required of government through the Federal Writing Act of 2010 and California Government Code 6219. Plain language is defined as plain and straightforward, and so that it's easily understood the first time you read a document. The plain language concept will follow writing techniques developed by the federal government. And so the concept will include adding a table of contents, reformatting paragraphs as question and answer like a manual. It will limit the number of words per sentence for precision and use active verbs. And will also write in first or second person by using you whenever referencing the inspector. Okay, so on this slide is the first sentence of the current ability to pay paragraph in regulation. In its entirety, ability to pay is 2 sentences long and presents 6 different ideas. This language, as presented, requires a person to have a PhD level of education to be able to read it once and understand it the first time. Meaning those without that level of education have to reread this paragraph over and over again until they can understand it. So on this slide is a suggested example of the ability to pay rewritten using the federal writing techniques. This example is used to demonstrate the plain language before and after while using the writing techniques. It's not intended to propose draft regulatory language. The suggested example demonstrates the use of question and answer format. It limits the number of words per sentences and uses the you and I format. More importantly, by using these techniques, the reading level is now lowered from a PhD to a high school reading level, making the regulations easier to understand and more widely accessible. So in summary, the general changes, concepts that were discussed in part 2 is that multi-day will increase the per day penalty from 2% to 5%. If a facility fails to return to compliance after the fix-it period, the per day penalty will increase to 20% per day. Economic benefit will include a rule to increase the penalty only if the economic benefit is more than $500. And plain language addresses feedback to improve readability, use clear language, and create transparency. Okay, I'm going to hand it back over to Marcus to start our next public feedback. Thank you.
Thank you, Renee, for presenting those conceptual ideas. Great presentation, folks. Really appreciate that. Thank you for the effort and for the professionalism in the presentations. Phenomenal. Okay, so that concludes part 2 of our presentation. And so again, we'd like to open it up now for public feedback. Much in line with how we did it through the first feedback segment, I'd like to invite you to the podium and to the microphone. And if you would prefer to stay where you are, that is totally okay as well. We have planned for all eventualities. We have wireless microphones and can bring them to you if you need. And just another reminder that there are multitudes of ways to provide your feedback, and I don't want to belabor you by going through them again. However, the public comment period is open through September 29th. So there's still ample time and opportunity to gather and provide feedback. Do we have anyone who would like to make any other comments, questions, or input? Please let us know. Wow, we did a great job today. So, okay. Thank you. Yes, please. And if you could just state your name and affiliation just one more time for us. Thank you.
So Christine Flowers, professor at Sac State, work with NGOs. So 2 things. It is really important that you make the language clear and easy to understand, and I applaud you for doing it. I'm here as a cheerleader because I think it's very important. Most of the staff and the people working through the NGO side have a hard enough time trying to read what is out there and then any of the constituents that you're trying to reach to. Number 2, you just gave me an example for my writing intensive class that all the EMVS students have to take, and a lot of them end up being state staff, local government staff, NGO, or working for consulting firms. And so we're trying to change the way that we teach those classes, and that was a great example.
Thank you.
Hands down. So thank you. And then we will give you written comment from the various organizations I represent. I just don't want to do a hard verbal comment. But thank you again, because it's really important. And I haven't seen a lot of agencies doing this.
Thank you, Christine.
Taking the lead. DTSC is taking the lead.
Really appreciate that. Thank you so much. And I will just add to that and say that in public participation, we hear from many stakeholders in communities, and irrespective of their level of education, whether they have a high school education or they have PhD level educations, everyone appreciates a brief, concise, and plain read. So we really appreciate that feedback. Thank you. One more comment.
Thank you, Matt Williamson, again, attorney at Manat, Phelps and Phillips. I fully agree that plain language concept is welcome, and I can think of particularly on the federal side, they're making a push on this, and it is very helpful for folks to be able to read plain language, and it is very helpful when I'm talking to clients about what to expect and have that language that they can understand. 2 concerns in this particular context is I think that the most confusing part when you're talking about penalties is not in the regulatory language, it is in the Health and Safety Code section, and it talks about when DTSC can and cannot impose penalties when there are discussions going on with return to compliance. So I would urge you to address the Health and Safety Code section that I find to be very difficult to apply to real world situations. And that kind of leads me to my second question or comment, which is, while I certainly support and think plain language is a very good idea here, the reality is that these enforcements are oftentimes very complex and can have dozens of alleged violations that get challenged, resulting in either amended inspection reports being issued or addendum inspection reports with back and forth correspondence. And so it can become very confusing and difficult to understand, is a facility come back into compliance during what was referred to as the fix-it period? How do we incorporate challenges and ongoing dialogue between the agency and the permitted facility, talking about what can be a very complex fix that can require permitting approvals that can then be appealed and end up before the Board of Environmental Safety? So I make those two comments because I appreciate and I think it is a good goal and a goal that you should strive for to simplify the language in the rulemaking. But don't lose sight of the fact that this is a very complex issue. And if the complexity in the process isn't addressed in that simplified language, then I think we're going to be right back in a situation where the ambiguity is going to swallow or even, overtake any benefits we got from simplifying the language here.
Thank you, Matt. Appreciate your comments and even more so your presence today. Thank you. All right. So any other comments, questions, or thoughts for our panel today? Okay. Well, we are not done with this process, and so I'd like to review the next steps that we anticipate. I think I mentioned earlier that this is the preliminary, very initial rulemaking stage for this initiative and effort. And the team anticipates more than likely 2024, but potentially late 2023, transitioning to the formal rulemaking process for the assessment effort. And again, we have 2 more public meetings, repeats of today's meeting. The next is scheduled on August 16th in downtown Los Angeles. And a third is scheduled for August 31st in Berkeley, in our regional Berkeley office. Announcements with RSVP links and all of the details needed for attendees to participate will be issued, the same as have been issued here. I'd like to invite you, if you have constituents or stakeholders that you think would also appreciate receiving notifications for those meetings, please let us know. We can add them to our constant contacts email list and ensure that they receive those announcements prior to those meetings. And just one last mentioning that the comment period opens today for this effort and will run through September 29th. Your agenda and your presentation materials provide the web link for you or any other individuals you may advocate for to visit the website and provide their feedback online. All right. I think that about covers everything. On behalf of our panel and on behalf of the Department of Toxic Substances Control and on behalf of myself, I want to say thank you. Really appreciate you being here with us today. In-person meetings are a little bit fewer and further between than they used to be. And it just feels good to be here with you all today. And I hope you feel the same. So with that, I will adjourn and I will recommend and encourage that you all make it back safe to wherever it is you are going today. Thank you for joining us. Goodbye.